There's so many things you mentioned there. I just want to pick a few. So the mythologies, right? The British had three mythologies, right? The Chinese are unruly. The Tamils, maybe not the Indians generally, but the Tamils are docile. The
Mm-hmm.
Malays are lazy, right? How powerful have this mythology shaped the mentality of the Tamil population historically?
I think it's a
Mm.
very loaded, sensitive question. um, but I'll try.
Well, the first thing I'll ask you to do, right, is to say, are Tamils docile? Is the myth a fact?
Yes, I think myths, come
Yeah,
about because they serve certain purposes, right? And but the problem also is that they become very difficult to shake off, because they become, in a sense, self-perpetuating, given historical contingencies.
yeah.
Given the fact that the vast majority of Tamil settlers in this region didn't have much agency, didn't have much of a space to agitate because they were pegged as laborers. It became easy to see them as docile, as lacking in modernity, progress,
Yeah.
as sort of languishing in squalor, alcoholism, illiteracy. It became easy to attach all of those labels because colonial rule was such that there was no incentive to uplift any segment of the population unless there was
Mm,
a direct, profit to the colonial establishment in doing that. So, for that reason, as we know, um, there wasn't much by way of support for these people that were settling in
mm,
Malaya, besides and beyond the most meager of provisions that were given. In terms of how far these labels have affected
yeah.
the Tamil identity, I would say that much of the early efforts at reform, as I mentioned, was in response to this kind of profiling, was in response to this kind of stereotyping. It was
Mm,
to be specific, it was to avoid the continuance of such stereotyping that these reformist initiatives even took off in the first place. In terms of how much of that stigma or that profiling
mm,
remains today, I think there's a great deal of sensitivity still.
mm,
And there is always a certain pressure to appear modern, to appear assimilated into the Singaporean fold. And this has sometimes come at the expense of underplaying the Tamil identity. I might be very honest about this.
mhm,
There is always this, or rather, let me put it this way, there is usually a sort of anxiety that appearing to be too Tamil would mean uh, associating with tradition at the expense of appearing to lack modernity, appearing to um, be
mm,
Singaporean, which
mm.
has become, in a sense, tantamount to embracing progress.
I mean, the idea of being docile, right, is kind of contextualized, right? Because the British are thinking about the people who are willing to work at those kinds of terms and circumstances. They are very difficult and demeaning. So if you look at the Tamil employment in Malaya and Singapore, if you are working on a plantation, you really have to be docile to be effective
Mm.
plantation labor. You work kind of in it's almost like a camp, and you can't leave the camp, and you have got to come under the thumb of the manager, the European manager. In
Mm.
Singapore, probably a lot of the Tamils work for British military or commercial establishments like the
Mm.
port, the harbor board, or the British bases that working inside as municipal or cleaners or that kind of jobs. Maybe there would be some in the kind of white collar jobs, but most would be in blue collar work. And so there is a very direct hierarchy of command, right, where the Tamils are working under, where it seems like they are docile, right?
Mhm.
But um, just thinking outside of employment, right? Like, what are the most vigorous displays of Tamil agency outside of employment when they are no longer in the gardens or in the bases working for the British? What might be some of these expressions of Tamil agency? I mean, like on a social level,
Mhm.
not so much in terms of the leaders, but on a social community level, like outside of non-employment, non-economic, what might be some expressions of Tamil agency that they are really not a docile people, they are people with their own minds and assertiveness.
Oh, plenty.
Mm.
And if I might just share some of
Yeah.
the work that I have recently sort of
Mm.
presented elsewhere, again under the umbrella of reform,
Mm.
but not quite, because this was taking place in the Tamil districts of the Madras Presidency. But there we have a situation where an upper caste Tamil leader, premier of Madras Presidency at that time, uh, Rajaji, decides to introduce compulsory Hindi language education in the Tamil districts of South India. And we have Tamils recruiting, enlisting in order to go to Tamil Nadu to resist what they see as the imposition of Hindi in the Tamil country. Right. So here we have a very striking instance of Tamil agency playing out in the political domain, not politics in Malaya necessarily, but politics um, in South India. So here we have a newspaper clipping which shows this, and also includes a photograph of the three anti-Hindi volunteers who enlisted to resist Hindi imposition in South India. It says um, Singapore brothers or friends in Chennai court. Apparently, these people have nothing better to do in life, but we know that that is not the case, is the subtext here. 10 Singapore volunteers were uh, imprisoned as a result of, or in order to reprimand them because of their decision to resist the uh,
Yeah.
the decision to resist Hindi imposition in South India.
Mm.
So, and they, as you can see here, uh, got 7.5 months jail as a result of their efforts. So, this is an example of the kind of agency that we see. But we also see Tamil agency play out in terms of the donations that various segments of society collected for Tamil schools, for instance, or their turnout at events like this. So when the South Indian reformer um, Erode Venkatapati Ramasamy Periyar, better known as Periyar, visited Singapore. He visited Singapore and Malaya twice in his lifetime, once in 1929 and again in 1954. Tamils turned out in droves, in the thousands, to listen to his speeches. They also donated generously to the Tamil school. So all of this again shows the kind of agency that played out
Mm.
um, in various domains, which were largely concerned with reform, I would say. I think this was
Yeah.
the dominant sort of preoccupation for the community at that point in time. The
Mm.
early to mid 20th century, the dominant concern was really how do we position ourselves as an equal among equals in this country of settlement? How do we wipe the slate clean and begin afresh? Right?
Mm.
And so reform really became the order of the day.
Yeah, so interesting, right? That language became, such a emotive and activist issue, right, for the Tamils.
Mhm.
What was the profile of the majority of the Tamils in Singapore? Were they educated? Did they know Tamil formally?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
it's another great question.
Mm.
Language became a unifying force also because there was very little else to fall back on. Most of these settlers were, as we have talked about, of the working classes. They belong to the working classes. They spoke Tamil. They
Yeah.
may not be literate in Tamil, or rather, they might not be able to read and write the
Mm.
language, but they
Mm.
would speak it.
Mm.
Um, in terms of caste, they were drawn generally from the lowest caste orders. But there were also, particularly in Singapore, we find that caste had survived migration. There were also upper caste groups that brought the same sort of notions of caste, that existed back home here. And so there was a great deal of resistance to anti-caste or caste eradication efforts in Singapore that were expressed by upper caste groups. So, for instance, when we talk about the arrival of the South Indian reformer Periyar, upper caste organizations tried to block his visit. So there was a casteist sort of backlash to
Mm.
many of these efforts that were geared against that institution. So, in that context, where class and caste were not strong unifying factors, where in fact they would cause disunity between the various groups. The one thing that surpassed all of these differences was not religion, was not class, was not caste, it was
Yeah.
language. And so
Mm.
language surfaced as a particularly, as you pointed out, particularly emotive issue. It assumed pride of place as the glue that would hold the community together as it agitated for recognition as an equal among
Mm.
equals.
Yeah. So interesting. So not actually religion. It was more language was more important than religion
Yes,
because there's a diversity of religion among the Tamils.
yes, definitely. So,
Mm.
besides Hindus, who are the majority, we also have Muslims. In fact, we have the Kadayanallur Muslim League, one of the oldest Tamil organizations to be formed in Singapore. Um, but and also, the Tamil Muslims have been at the forefront of pressing for all kinds of initiatives. They have been pioneers of Tamil language. So Umar Pulavar School again is a nod to the pioneering contributions of the Tamil Muslim community. Um, Besides the Hindus and the Muslims, we have Christians as well, the
Yeah.
Catholics,
Mm. Mm.
Tamil Methodists, for instance. And so religion as a basis of identity was not as effective as language. So the one thing that all of the community could claim was an interest in promoting the Tamil language, which is what the leaders of the community sought to do. They sought to make the Tamil language the basis of political representation.
Do you think I should ask John Solomon to talk about caste?
Yes, I think definitely.
Would it be of interest, do you think? Because I think what his argument is that, caste was never a thing in Singapore like it was in India. But
Mm.
there's still a history there
Yes.
to trace, right?
Yes. No, I think caste became a non-issue precisely because of these reformist
Mm.
initiatives.
Mm.
I
Okay.
think today
Okay.
we can talk about the disappearance of caste only because those historical contingencies made it such that it disappeared, right? Without, let's say, the Tamil Reform Association or the kind of role that the Tamil Murasu played, or the Dravidian movement more broadly, self-respect, the rhetoric of self-respect,
Mm.
we cannot talk about a caste-free Singapore.
Yeah, good, good. I'll ask John. I want to go back to the myths again, or rather the kind of associations, right, with ethnicity. So, Chinese have been always accused by the British of being
Mhm.
that they are, what is the word? They are incorrigible gamblers. Uh,
Unscrupulous, corrigible, yes.
incorrigible, yeah. And the Tamils, especially right among the Indians, for their alcoholism.
Yes.
Mm. Could you talk about toddy in the life and the culture of the Tamils?
Toddy again accompanied Tamil labor migration into Malaya, and it was in India. It was in south of India where this understanding that toddy is um, the drink par excellence of the Tamils first entered colonial, policy, became a matter of policy that, the Tamil laborer needs to drink. And if he has to drink something, that might as well be toddy. That understanding was first forged
Mm.
as a result of self-seeking, self-serving colonial
Mm.
observations that were first recorded, that were first, that first became the basis of colonial policy in South India. With labor migration and with Tamil settlement in Malaya, it made sense to apply the same sort of colonial understandings, colonial knowledge to labor migration in this part of the world as well. So again, I think there was a divide and rule policy that equally applied to vice. So while the British were very prone to seeing the Chinese as especially sort of
Mm.
given to gambling, the Malays later on to drugs, the Tamils' vice of choice became, in colonial understandings and imaginings, alcohol, particularly toddy drinking.
Mm.
But again, here, a very self serving colonial policy was directly responsible for that. So, if we were to look at the plantation frontier in
Mm.
Malaya, we see that toddy shops were deliberately located in close proximity to labor uh, quarters, to states where these laborers
Mm.
lived
Mm.
and worked. Similarly, we find that you know um, toddy shops in Singapore were often located in close proximity to areas where daily rate uh, wage laborers, DRE, right? Daily, sorry, I forget
Rated,
like that.
daily
Daily
rated.
rated, yes.
Yeah.
Wage laborers worked. And so the fact that these laborers would go to these establishments to get their drink fed into this sort of self-fulfilling colonial understanding that, see, the laborer needs his toddy in order to remain docile. And so that became a cornerstone of labor management as well.
So this toddy was very affordable, right? There was no tax basically on toddy, right? I guess.
That's right.
Hmm.
Well, there was a tax, and
Right.
that tax again fed into colonial coffers, both in South India and in Malaya. But the reason why there was every incentive to keep the price of toddy low was again, and I talk about this in my paper, Toddy Race and Urban Space in Singapore,
Mm.
was this notion that the Tamil laborer can even forego his rice. They can
Mm.
forego their food, but they cannot forego toddy. So if you were to raise the price of toddy, that would drive them to drink more deleterious sources of alcohol like samsu to their ruin. So in order to promote the welfare of the Tamil laborer, we need to ensure that there is a price cap on toddy. So this served to ensure that the tax on toddy continued. It is served to ensure that the toddy trade, the toddy industry continued, and at the same
Mm.
time, under this thin veneer of this welfarist sort of rhetoric that the colonial state provided of taking care of the Tamil laborer.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the shops were close to the labor quarters, right? Where were the Tamils staying in general? Was there a part like let's say Serangoon Road? Was there were they staying there? How having moved out, from the town area? Uh, where was the concentration of Tamils in Singapore historically?
Yes, so there were
Mm.
several areas like
Mm.
that. So Serangoon area, the Little India cluster has been one such area. Jalan Besar adjoining this area would be another such area. And
Mm.
some of the areas where toddy shops were found, operated, thrived were these areas as well. Serangoon Serangoon sort of cluster, Jalan Besar, the St. George area, uh, Palestia. These were all areas which were known for toddy shops.
Was there a reason why the Tamils tended to congregate in those areas?
I think it was the safety in numbers and the sense
Mm-hmm.
of community that accrued to, that community already having set up base there. And so it
Mm,
became easy to cluster together in that area in much the same way
mm.
that the Kangani logic of labor recruitment worked.
Yeah, yeah.
Notion of,
Mm,
see, I've done well, so you can come and you can set up shop next to
mm.
mine. And yeah,
I don't know if you can say something about the history, the origin and the history of Serangoon Road.
not really actually. I've not really looked at the sort of
Has there been a proper study of the history of Serangoon Road?
it's a great question. To
Mm,
my understanding, no, not
mm,
really.
yeah.
Maybe some few theses, academic, exercises, but not a proper study. Well, there's Victor Savage's book. Although
Yeah.
I don't think it particularly looks at sort of ethnic, aspects of settlement and
Which
clustering.
book is this? Do you mean the street one?
Yes,
Right,
street
right.
names and yeah,
Yeah. In your view, right, what is the best classic work on Tamil history in Singapore?
I think it has yet to be written.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the main issue
Yeah.
with works, like for instance, we could talk about Vinita Sinha's work on Muniswaran worship in the diaspora,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, or we could talk about Rajeshwari Ampalavanar Brown's work on Tamil politics in Malaya broadly. But the main issue remains that works that have looked at um, aspects of Tamil settlement, or John Solomon's work, for instance,
Mm,
either tend to look at it entirely, or let me put it this way, they tend to look at it almost entirely from the perspective of what was going on in Singapore alone.
mm,
Whereas I would say that the community's sense of self, community's identity has been equally shaped by developments that were unfolding in India. So, the reason why I say that a comprehensive study has yet to be written is because I would think that any attempt to get at the community's consciousness, sense of self, and how that has shifted or not shifted with time, the points of continuity as well as the points of change, would also take into consideration how the community as a whole was grappling with changes in Tamil Nadu, the land that it had left behind, because
mm,
it would become clear, even if we were to look at cultural convergences and points of divergence today, that that relationship hasn't entirely been severed. There is a complex relationship between the community, how it positions itself here, and how it sees itself relative to the Tamil identity in Tamil Nadu. So I think, you know, a work that
mm,
employs the community's position relative to these positions in Singapore, in Malaya, and India would be that comprehensive work on the Tamil community in Singapore.
mm. Is that mostly in terms of social reform, or is that true of Tamil history in general? That the change of orientation.
I would think that is true of Tamil history in general.
Mm,
I mean, reform is but one prism or lens through
right.
which we can
Yeah.
plot this. But so much of the community's identity has been shaped by experiences of migration and settlement. And then post settlement, how do we now orientate ourselves vis a vis the the homeland, the mother country from which we came? So that um, the complexity of that relationship needs to be addressed in any work on Tamil history.
Is there a period of time then when this Tamil Nadu influence, right, began to wane and the Tamils in Singapore began to kind of settle down and become more localized? And what is happening in their community is happening because of local developments rather than uh, developments in Tamil Nadu. Are we
Mm.
looking at the post-war period as this kind of moment of change?
Yes, so
Mm,
definitely. So I think in the 50s, there is a growing awareness, consciousness that we need to be focused primarily on developments taking place in Singapore, Malaya, as opposed to seeing ourselves as migrants from India. So we see that in terms of the
mm,
literary works that were being, written, that were being circulated. We see that in terms of newspapers. We see that in terms of radio programs, etc. This growing assertion of a Malayan identity, which then crystallizes into a
mm,
Singaporean identity, a discernible Singaporean identity, when it becomes, when that shift becomes imminent, and when it becomes imminent that Singapore is going to go its own path. But at the same time, I mean,
mm,
the reason why I say that this is a complex relationship is because articulations of belonging were still being negotiated and articulated, or being forged in relation to the Indian factor. So even though there is
mm,
a sense of a growing distance, in the first place, there is this assertion that there needs to be a distance from India because the leaders of the community were were of the opinion that people still see themselves very much as Tamil,
mm,
Indian first, and Malayan second. So even in that period, even with that growing sort of attempts at distancing, we see foremost anxiety there that there is this relationship that needs to be rethought. Post
mm,
independence, I think what happens is politically there is a distance between developments in in India, in Tamil Nadu, as they're
mm.
unfolding there, and and declarations of allegiance foremost to the Singapore state. But culturally, the resonances that were coming in from Tamil Nadu, whether in terms of cinema, whether in terms of popular culture broadly, remained very strong. And so we see this imprint of Tamil popular culture, Tamil mass media, very much on the kind of radio programs, subsequently television programs that came into existence in Singapore, uh, beyond independence as well.
Yeah, I mean, how much of it is generational and age? Because even after the war, after the 1950s, you still have I think, the more sojourning kind of Tamils who want to go back to the village and,
Mm.
buy land there and retire there, right? And so they would ultimately leave Singapore, even though the laws in Singapore allowed them to settle down in Singapore and bring their family over, right? There's this maybe more among the older generation in the 1950s compared to the younger people. And
Mm.
I think also the prospects for Singapore did not look good at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Economically, Singapore in 1950s is not what it is in the 1970s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people still think Singapore would not succeed,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, was there a change then in terms of the generations? Did the baby boomers, have a more were they more predisposed to look at Singapore as their homeland rather than, the compared to the generations, compared to their elders?
Yeah, I think this is a great question,
Mm-hmm.
and also something that I can speak to from personal
Mm,
family experience. So if I were to trace my own family's history by way of taking a step back and answering this from that experience, um, my grandfather, or not my grandfather, my great grandfather, that is my grandmother's father,
mm,
moved to Singapore in the 1910s, and my grandmother was born here in 1930s, in the 1930s. My father was born here, or rather, my father was born in 1949 in India, and the reason why he was born in India was
mm,
because of the Japanese occupation, which was when the family decided that this was no longer safe, and so they moved right before the occupation. They remained in India until after my father was born, and then they moved back when it appeared that the coast was clear. So that ambivalence of where exactly is home is something that was very much there for the family as a whole. You're right to say
Mm,
more so for the older generations and less for
mm,
those who are born here. Like my father was born in India, but he sees himself very much as Singaporean born.
mm,
And but at the same time, I think while his allegiances and the allegiances of that generation are primarily to Singapore as the land of their birth, and I'm not just talking about him, but many in that generation that I've spoken to as well, who are Indian, who identify as Tamils. While there is a growing assertion of allegiance to Singapore as compared to the ambivalence of the
mm,
previous generations, I think what also happens is a tendency to look at India as a counterpoint to what is happening in Singapore. So that point of reference is always there. It's always this notion of we have done well, they have not. So it's a good thing we moved. Sort of
mm,
rhetoric
mm, mm,
has not faded. I think more recent generations, for my generation, for instance, or even younger generations, that sense of distance from India is much greater.
mm,
But again, this is a distance that we might track in terms of political allegiance, but not so much in terms of cultural allegiance. Where culture is concerned, the relationship is far more complex. So we relate to various aspects of popular culture, we relate to various aspects of language, linguistic affinities that bind us from South India, Tamil Nadu to Singapore. But where politics is concerned, we're not as invested in, but I think we're generally not invested in politics.
mm.
Yes.
That's right. Could you talk about the post-war migration to Singapore? I think I do remember reading that the among the three major ethnic groups in Singapore, the Indians were the last to be fully settled. That means bringing the families over, or having families in Singapore. Because of the sex ratio, it was still very uneven, even after the war. So I think one of the first waves of migration after the war was to bring the women over, or more women came over. Could you talk about that? And were there single women also coming over from Tamil Nadu to Singapore because of the opportunities for employment or opportunities for marriage?
So this
Mm,
situation started improving
mm,
post-depression, which was when immigration to Malaya was actively discouraged, except for
mm,
women who were joining their families who are already resident in
mm, mm,
Singapore. So this was an opportunity for women who had been left behind by their husbands to join them. And from that point onwards, the gender imbalance, the gender ratio started to improve. But it wasn't until, um,
mm,
post-war that families really started being established
mm,
in in Singapore. Indian families or Tamil families started really being established in Singapore. One of the reasons was because of the stigma that attached to Tamil women's migration
mm,
to this part of the world. I think late 19th century, the gender imbalance was so dire, was so skewed as to prompt a colonial official themselves. I believe this was 1895, and we have this on record when a colonial official said, no woman from Tamil Nadu, from the Tamil districts of South India, can come to Malaya and return with her honor intact.
mm,
So bad was the kind of gender imbalance that presented and the host of social problems that
mm,
attached to that. That itself became a major impediment for Tamil women seeking employment. Of course, the exception to this would be the Ayahs who are coming in, as Arunima Datta's work would show. So, among working class women, the kind of stigma that attached to migration has historically not been as pronounced as it has been for the other classes. And particularly when it comes to caregiving, when it comes to the kind of positions that opened up in domestic service, for instance, in colonial households, that conferred a degree of respectability to women who took on these jobs. And so that kind of position, ayahs, domestic servants in European households, for instance, was an occupation that the Tamil woman
Mm.
did avail herself to.
Yeah, it's still a common term, right? Ayah,
Yeah,
used by the Chinese to refer to you. I think often like hospital context, like attendants in the hospital,
that's right.
right? But it's a more general term referring to what domestic servants.
Yes, ayah in the Indian context would
Uh,
refer more to paid household help,
mm.
female household help.
So what would they do? They do cleaning, washing,
Yeah, and they mainly serve the purpose of being nannies to children.
right? So because the Hainanese also do that, right? Among the Chinese.
Mm.
Do you know how the British decided? What ethnicity they are going to employ? What kind
I
of households would be
hmm,
employing the ayahs?
I'm not looked into the ethnic aspect of this consideration,
Right.
but I'm sure there must have been though.
Okay. The term ayah means is a what, a Tamil term or a British term?
I believe it is a Tamil term.
Okay. And so there was already a group of kind of semi-professional domestic help in Tamil Nadu,
No,
or
actually,
or did the girls just come over and started to work in the British
yeah. So
households? Okay.
they would be recruited for the purpose of serving in British households. Yeah,
Mm-mm.
and they were
Would
not just drawn from Tamil Nadu. In fact,
Right. Okay.
Arunima Datta's argument is that the vast majority came from the other regions of India.
Right.
Yeah.
Were they allowed to like seek other employment? Like, were they allowed to seek other employment? Were they allowed to marry and all that?
No, so
No.
they came under certain carefully controlled conditions under
Oh.
contractual terms, which determined, the years of service, the terms
Mm.
of service. So they didn't have the kind of flexibility to move around.
So they would have left very little imprint in our history.
Yes. So this
Ah.
is again an aspect of
Okay.
sort of forgotten histories that we have been talking about.
Mm. Did they have uniforms?
No, not for the most part. No.
Mm-mm.
So I mean, I think today we tend to think about these things in a much more sort of rationalized manner and standardized in terms of uniforms and things of that nature. But in the context that we are thinking in terms of no.
Why was there this stigma among the kind of more middle class, right? The Tamil women to migrate. Where
Mm.
did the stigma come from? Was it from religion or?
I think a lot of this can
Mm,
be understood with respect to caste and the caste
uh,
logic that attaches to migration. So the Hindi word that often is used to describe the experience of migration is Kala Pani, black waters, which also hints at the kind of pollution that is understood to attach to migration. So, historically, culturally, there has always been this notion that migration is deeply polluting.
mm,
And because notions of purity and pollution, especially attached to the upper caste communities, which have everything to gain from embracing purity and shunning pollution, and conversely everything to lose if they become polluted, the aversion to polluting activities like migration has historically tended to attach more to those communities as compared to the working classes. There is a convergence, a congruence between caste and class here. The working classes have generally uh, tended to come from the lowest caste orders as well.
So there's a question there I can ask. But before that, right? What do you mean by migration is polluting? Do you mean leaving your home, leaving your family is polluting?
No, crossing the seas is
Crossing the seas. Okay. Okay. So then why didn't more working class women come?
They did. And then,
Yeah.
because of the problem also was that the kind of work, so if you were to look at that
Mm,
late 19th century context, the kind of work that presented was work on the plantation frontier, which required hard physical labor. So there were limitations to how many women could come in order to take up those jobs. But when
mm,
that shifted, when the Kangani system of labor recruitment becomes more widespread because of the rubber boom, and there's a need for a resident, uh, docile, laboring population, then it makes sense to bring in women so that these women could settle down and have families. And those families could produce children who would continue the labor lines, who would continue working for
mm,
and on these plantation frontiers. So it was then that women's labor on the plantation frontier, or generally speaking in Malaya, became even
mm,
more pressing. But by that point in time, the
mm,
skewed sort of gender imbalance, the gender ratio, had already created a stigma that kept women from coming because of this notion that if you were to go to Malaya, then you are compromising your honor in that sense,
mm.
because you are opening yourself to all kinds of abuse that comes with being in that kind of situation.
Sounds like it has always been difficult for Tamil women in Malaya and Singapore, right? It's not like the men. The experience, the feedback is profoundly different.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
there's a situation of multiple layers of marginalization working together here, right?
Mm,
Race, class, and then gender on top of that.